Recognition, power, and influence is your birthright, and this podcast shows you how to get there. Welcome to episode number 253. Today's episode is being released on the day of the United States presidential election. This has been a long-awaited election. Many Americans are holding their breath. They are hoping to breathe a sigh of relief after the end of today. And we also know that we have a long way to go collectively as both a country and also across the entire world. And last month, I interviewed an incredible woman, Deepa, not only a political activist for women's rights, but she has also broken a number of glass ceilings herself. And she is very outspoken about her challenges, how far we have come as a community, and also how much further we still need to go all across the world. And I think I don't want to even say no matter what happens today, because I can't go there. But I want you to know, and I want you to pray with me, to inhale deeply, to close your eyes, and to really imagine what is possible for women of color, and for everybody who can benefit by shifting the tables of power in leadership. Deepa is also the author of The First, the Few, and the Only: How Women of Color Can Redefine Power in Corporate America. And I am so delighted to have her on today as part of this monumental occasion. Let's get started. Welcome to Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy, and I teach you how to get promoted, get paid, and bring your whole self to the leadership table. I am on a mission to change organizations from the C-suite out, because women are the new face of leadership, and we are doing it on our terms. Hello, corporate badasses. Welcome to another episode of Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and super excited, as always, to be here with you again this week. I am so excited for today's guest. As you've heard me on this podcast say before, I completely admit that one of the reasons I love my podcast so much is that people who I respect, people who I admire, I can bring on here and have a one-to-one conversation with them. And it gives me such an opportunity to really connect with powerful leaders that just inspire me, and then hopefully inspire you as well. And I guarantee that today's leader is going to be one of those inspirations. You know, Deepa, who I will introduce more formally, is somebody that you should definitely follow on LinkedIn if you're not already. That is where I get my daily dose of inspiration from her. She also has a book that we're going to talk about, and then her body of work where she is helping women of color and finding more opportunities for women in the workplace. And so it's very much aligned with the work that I do, and I'm so excited to have you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you. I know it'll be a great conversation.
Awesome. Well, here's your formal bio. Deepa Purushothaman is a trusted and bold advisor to both women looking to thrive in their professional lives and companies seeking to attract and retain top talent. She is the author of The First, the Few, the Only: How Women of Color Can Redefine Power in Corporate America, and a former senior partner at Deloitte. She is also a TED and South by Southwest speaker and has been featured in Time, PBS, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and Harvard Business Review. Her TED Talks have over 3 million views. Thank you, Deepa.
Absolutely.
So first question out of the gate, what do you feel like have been your own personal secrets to success?
You know, I think part of it for me, I should back up a little bit and say I started at Deloitte right out of grad school, and I spent over 21 years there. So my, corporate experience, I've been out now for 3.5, 4 years, but my corporate experience was really at that one entity. And so when I started, I was very young, kind of figuring out the ropes. And I think what really served me, and I'm not saying it serves everybody, but really served me is I went into it not thinking I'd be there forever, and also just open to learning. So my background and my interest was actually policy and politics. And so I'm going to get a year or two of corporate experience, then I'm going to move on. And I just found it to be such a place where I was inspired, where there was just smart people around me. And I was in strategy when I started. So every 6 weeks, I was on a new project with new clients and new people. I was just learning. And so I think adopting that sort of approach of I'm going to soak it all in, I'm going to be helpful where I can, but really just being open to the fact that I didn't know and I had a lot to learn has really served me. And it's still how I approach my work, and working with women and how to advance them. I don't have all the answers, but I think from hearing the stories, I can see patterns and make advice.
Yeah. And, in terms of being the first, the few, the only at Deloitte, I know this is a huge part of your journey and your story. Can you talk to us about what some of those firsts were?
Absolutely. So I was the first Indian female partner, and I made partner really young. So I made partner in my early 30s. And so I felt like there were always eyes on me, less, in all candor for being a woman of color. And I think more just for being a female partner and not necessarily having for myself role models that looked and acted like me, because I was navigating my personal life. I was trying to figure out how it's going to find balance. I was trying to, just figure out my life. And I think a lot of the role models I had around me were successful, mostly men, because I worked in the tech and telecom space, but, they had answered those questions for themselves. And so I found myself always kind of looking around and saying, I admire some of these leaders, but they don't exactly feel and look like me. They're not facing some of the same challenges I'm facing as a single woman early in my career, trying to, be taken seriously, but also just figure out how to make all the plates continue to spin. And so yeah, it was I think a lot of the navigating and figuring it out on my own.
So one thing that, and I have a very limited view of Deloitte, but I've worked with a few female clients that have worked there and women of color at Deloitte and just Deloitte in general. And there are certain organizations that are like this. They have a very formulaic process for getting promoted. It's like, I don't know, I think there's actually a book that you receive and it says, this is how you do it. This is how you advocate. And a lot of it has to do with sponsorship. I mean, it's a really unique process that I think works for and against us. Can you talk about that? You don't have to talk about specifics of Deloitte if you don't want to, but just in general, there are women who there's no process at their organization at all, and they're just sort of creating it. And then you have this formal process that you're trying to fit yourself into. How did that work out for you?
Yeah, so the path to making partner is you almost go on a year-long roadshow.
Yeah, exactly.
You kind of get the thought, you're going to be up, and then you're basically stating your business case. You have to put it down on slides, and then you literally travel the country meeting with leadership, getting feedback, and kind of sharing your business model with them, convincing them that you'll have a book of business, right? That make someone, a leader, a partner, a P&L, owner. And then all of a sudden they don't necessarily have the relationships or the backup to that. That's kind of the philosophy of it. But I think, yes, I wouldn't say it's 100% formulaic. There's obviously room to bring to it, your own voice and your own story. But it can feel like this is kind of the checks I have to make to get there. And for someone like me who, was younger, who I actually went up as practice, I'm doing air quotes as I say that, I'd had a challenging personal year. I had broken up with the person I'd been living with, and I was a little bit of a mess. And I think they were like, why don't you just practice? I mean, this is probably not your year, but why don't you practice? And I ended up going through, and I did not travel the country. I did not, do all the things that you're supposed to do because I was in a little bit of a personal crisis. And it was more, I decided at that moment I was going to do it my way. I was going to make my life work for me first. And if I made it that year, great. And if I didn't, I was, again, going to get great intel for next year when I thought, it was my time. And I think there was some sort of power in, I don't want to say not caring so much, but kind of seeing it as practice, that the pressure was off, that actually worked for my advantage. So I think, yes, there can be a formula. It can be hard to maneuver when you feel like you have to check certain boxes. But I think part of my advice to your audience would be figure out how to do that in your own way. Because if you follow a formula, if you fit into an archetype of leadership that is not you, it's not going to work for you. And so part of it is understanding kind of the game plan, or how you play the game is how I say it. But I always encourage women not to play the game, to figure out what is the game, and then make choiceful decisions about how you show up for yourself. Because if you show up for yourself, I guarantee the rest will work. It may take a little bit longer, but it will work, and you'll have longevity. The challenge I find is a lot of women will get the seat, right? Do all the contortions to get the seat. But then within a year or two, they're so unhappy, or they're sick, or they're miserable. There's all these other things because they've sold away parts of themselves to get the seat. And so part of my work is really helping leaders get the seat, but to get it in a way that feels powerful and authentic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that this is such a great story because for somebody who doesn't look, think, act, and talk like the rest of the room, that's what I call it, is that, it's easy to think that the way that we'll have success is to look, think, act, and talk more like the rest of the room. And in this beautiful gift that you were given at that time in your life, you didn't have that as an option, right? Yep. So you had to, forge your own path. And I think one of the challenges, and I know you work with workplaces a lot, is that we think that, I don't know, maybe. It's like I say we, it's like I'm at some big corporation doing this, but I could imagine that adding a formulaic process can seem fair. So it's like we're going to bring more diversity to leadership because we're going to create a very fair and inclusive process. Yeah. What that does, I think, at least in your example, is that it excludes, because what it would do is it would kind of be a smoke and mirrors for a woman to say, hey, if you can kind of contort yourself into this way, then we have a fair and inclusive process and you'll get promoted. And then they get very confused when either one, they succeed and they don't like the job, or they do all the things and check all the boxes, but I still didn't get promoted.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a bigger question.
Yeah. We're we're going into it, but
it's a bigger question of how do we see leadership? And unfortunately, right, and this is a lot of my body of work, is that we tend to see leadership as a very sort of static, stoic model of what has come before. And so there's not room for us to really rethink, remake, redefine the qualities that we look for in leadership. And I did a lot of research around this on board readiness in particular. So it's not exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. We think of being board ready as, again, a very specific slate of characteristics like you're describing.
Right.
You have to have P&L experience. You have to have global experience. You have to have almost been there, done that. And what we find is there's just less women who've been in those seats because we're just, unfortunately getting those seats now. And so, yes, it tends to be formulaic. And what that can do is, one, it makes people not feel like they're ready. And women tend to then, as a result, take themselves out, even though they are ready, right? Because we tend to look at the list and maybe think we don't have part 2A, the second part of that line. Whereas a lot of what the research shows is men will just put themselves out there because whether they have it or not, they feel comfortable going forward. So part of it is realizing that list can push people out. But then I also think that list does make this narrow definition of what we think is ready. And so, yes, it's up to us, unfortunately, I think, one, to have enough confidence to go forward, but also to really recognize that definition is a little narrow. And so I want to do it a little bit my own way. And yes, there may be certain rules or expectations the company or the culture has, and you have to understand what those are, again, because you can't flout all of them. But when I work with women, I say, write down your list of what's important to you. And it's funny, when I do that exercise, it's a process, right? Because when you first ask someone to do that, they don't necessarily know how to do that. But they'll end up with 10 or 12 things that are truly important to them in their career. It's not 100 things. And I think part of the challenge we have is a lot of us believe bringing your whole self or your authentic self or all these, it's like this long list that I'll never be able to do. But if you know the 6 to 10 things that are so important to you, I then really encourage women not to give on those things and to figure out what those things are. So I think that's really the recipe we want to get to. It's not follow the formula, don't follow the formula, be your authentic self. It's not those extremes. It's really about what are the things that are truly important to you and that you feel like if you give up, you can't be you. And that's the magic, or that's really what we have to figure out. And there's not books on how you do that. There's not, trainings on how you do that. It's a little bit of you have to figure it out as you go.
Yeah, that's really great. So I was thinking about this idea of being the first, the few, the only, and a particular client came to mind who was definitely one of the first, the few, the only, and then became the poster child of the first, the few, the only, and then was sort of put in very awkward positions to speak up, in certain crises that we've faced in the United States over the past few years, and didn't really enjoy being put in that position. And I'm curious, from your standpoint, how do you both embrace that you are the first, the few, the only, and that you have this ability to be that spokesperson to stand up, and then also not let that be a deterrent to what you really want and start to lose some sight of yourself?
Yeah, what I find with first few onlys, and it's not just women of color, I think it's a lot of the, all the women that I speak with on this topic, there's this feeling of responsibility. I do see it more in women of color, but this responsibility for changing what's around them and for like bringing up what comes next. So this real deep sense of my work is not just the work I've been hired to do, but this extra set of things that sometimes is indescribable, they can't really fully list out. So I think part of it is understanding that for a lot of us, there are jobs beyond the job, like the job in the job is what I call it in the book. And then I think the other is that some of that is self-chosen, right? So that's important to me. I really want to change culture. I really want to bring up the next, crop of leaders. So I'm choosing to do that. But then there are other tasks that are almost put upon us. And that's really where the dance is. So it's understanding there are certain things you might be asked to do because of what you represent. I call it representing your race, but it could be representing your gender, representing your motherhood status. It could be anything. And so it's really kind of understanding what is it that's being put upon you, and do you want to take that? And also understanding that some days you may want to and some days you may not. Like when I work, especially with Black women, they'll say some days I can take on those extra roles that you're describing, but some days it's just too much. And it's okay that you don't have to do it every single day, every single time. And so that's a little bit of the magic as well. Once you understand what's being asked of you, it's being choiceful in the fact that you can say yes to certain things. And you can also find ways to say no to the things that just get burdensome, or to find a way to distribute them, right? So for example, if you're a young woman who keeps getting asked to take notes all the time, it's okay to say like, I'm happy to take them this time, but next time could, Joe take them, because I actually feel like it'd be helpful to get other people's thoughts in the, voice in the notes. Like it's just a creative way to distribute the work, to maybe not push back in a way that feels like you're not being a team player, but also doesn't just absorb that you're resentful or angry or annoyed about it later.
Yeah. And I could see the cultural component, this desire, this inherent desire to want to change the system or help others and lift others up, and then not wanting to say no because we have that burden and that desire. So really being able to ask ourselves ahead of time, what are my values? How do I want to be represented? And then also just being clear for yourself. Like, I still have value. I still change culture by being, who I am, right? That is enough.
Understanding all the extra. Again, I think sometimes we don't understand all the extra. I have research where I've asked white men, like how many people do you mentor? And they'll often say 6 to 10, maybe 12. And when I interview white women leaders, they'll say, 12 to 24, right? Because there's just less of them. When I ask women of color, sometimes they'll say 100, 200, many more than that, because they're the only one not in their company, but also in the industry. So for example, on LinkedIn, every week I get at least 30 to 40 messages from individual women saying, can I have a half an hour? I'm in crisis. Can I ask you a question? And I want to help them, but I obviously can't. That would be my full-time job and then some. So it's understanding like that volume does show up differently for different groups, and recognizing, yes, maybe today I can do that, but also how do you do that creatively? So I, for example, do a monthly call where I'm like, everyone can come and ask their questions, and maybe we can crowdsource answers, right? Or I'm trying this week. I have a tendency to say yes to things, and then I get so busy, and then I'm like, why did I say yes to all this, right? Especially things like boards or things that have an ongoing activity. I'm learning to say, yes, I'm happy to try that, but in 30 days, if it feels like too much or not a great fit, I'm going to revisit this.
Right.
But you have to practice doing that. And so, yes, it's a little bit of, again, understanding what's a choice versus what feels thrust upon you, but also finding creative ways about giving it back when it's just too much, because you're being evaluated, by the way, not necessarily for who you mentor, but like, the more of the task-oriented activities that are part of your job. And so that sometimes feels like too much for a lot of the women that I work with.
Yeah. So in your TED Talk, you talked about Walter, and I had goosebumps because I am well aware that I am a white woman and I work with women of color, and I try very hard to meet them where they're at, not make assumptions that their challenges are the same as mine, and just in this great example that you gave. And I don't know if this particular story happened to my client because she was a woman of color, but she definitely checked 2 boxes, as you talk about. And I want to share this story because not only did this story hit home, I gave her the exact same advice. So I stopped her. She was very sad that somebody told her that she would probably get this promotion because she checked 2 boxes, and she didn't understand why she was sad, like why that hurt, and it didn't feel like a win. And I was like, whoa, let's take a step back to the comment itself. And then we had a great conversation around that. So I would love for you to share the story if you don't mind. I think it's an important one to remember. And these sort of innocuous comments that we think are like, well, he was being nice. I mean, he, can really hurt and be very harmful.
Yeah, no. So Walter is the introduction of my book as well. And so Walter was a good friend I went to grad school with. We were at Harvard at the same time, and we continued to meet, once we got into our professional lives in New York, like once a year. And he had just made partner in his law firm roughly the same time I made partner at Deloitte. And I remember meeting him to celebrate. And as we were toasting, and again, someone I talked to, I would say my best friend at the time, we would talk often, multiple times a day. We're sitting there at dinner and we're toasting, and he is talking about all the pressures he feels about now having made partner and what comes next. And I'm sharing my concerns, and he stops me and says, Deepa, you don't have anything to worry about. You're a twofer. And I kind of looked at him, right? Had never had anyone say that comment to me, to my face in that sort of way. That you're a twofer, you're a woman of color. You check 2 boxes. You're not going to have anything to worry about. While people like me, I'm going to have to really work hard for what comes next. And I, talk about it in the book, but I got really quiet. I went into my head. I don't remember the rest of the things he said. And I think it was confusing to me because he was a good friend. So I was not prepared. In a different setting, I might have had my armor on and been for that. But secondly, I was like, why is this bothering me so much? And it's something I thought about for days afterwards, for weeks afterwards. And we never kind of recouped from that conversation because he didn't think it was a problem, even when we dissected it later. And part of what I know now is that we tend to hold on to negative comments 4 times as long as compliments. So anytime we're going to get a negative comment, it is normal and natural for us to kind of ruminate on that.
And you mean everybody?
Everybody
does this. This is humanity.
Psychologically proven. It's not my research, but it's science. It actually hold on to negative comments. So a lot of women now, and women of color who come to me will say, why do I still feel bad 2 days later? So it's not only the incident that's egregious, but it's the process then that we sit in where we beat ourselves up because we feel miserable, or we're like, why didn't we say anything? Why didn't I do more? Why, all these whys. And that is part of the normal process. And so what I encourage people to do is 2 different things. One is the same things tend to come up in our work lives over and over again. So for example, I know I have a really long last name. It's 13 letters long. I know people are always going to talk about my age, but I look younger than I am. And I often get, you speak English so well. When did you come to this country? Even though I was born here. And those things used to bother me, and they would happen weekly. And they used to bother me. Every time I would go back to that Walter feeling of what did I do? Am I not, sounding articulate enough? Am I not dressing the right way to look older? All these things that I did wrong. And you just got to a place where I now have a comeback for each of those things. And so my feedback around incidents like Walter's, they happen to us very often. And so if we can find ways to, one, not let the emotion of the situation seep in, it's hard, but if we can realize that's about them, not about me, if we can come up with comebacks or just responses that we not only write out, but that we practice saying, because in the moment, the emotion can take over so that we can defend ourselves. And then also realize it is normal to spin on those things because they would hurt anybody. They come up for all of us, but in different forms and different fashion.
Yeah, that's so helpful. Yeah, I really love that. And I think a lot of people, and like my client included, she couldn't get past the emotion of it, right? To even think that what he said was negative and, in any way. It was all about her and internalization of it.
And he didn't get that was negative, just to be clear. He was like,
even when you brought it up,
weeks, months later, I wasn't saying anything bad. I was just telling you how it is. That's actually taking away from my success. It's actually making, you're questioning, I feel like, how I got the seat. And you don't understand that that's undermining to me. And again, it's about him and not about me, but it's taken a couple of years, many years to get to that place.
So you talked about and I don't know if this was your degree, but you talked about politics and activism, and I very much see that on LinkedIn. You have a very strong voice, a lot of opinions, and that is so inspiring to me, and I want to get behind and have you on my platform, right? I want to share. So what are some of the ways that is now feeding into your career and your leadership in this next realm? And this is the second question, maybe same question, but we talked a little bit about when your book first came out, a lot of people wanted to talk about it, 2023. So what are some of the changes that have happened? I guess your book came out in 2022, and then now things are a little bit different. And so let's talk about all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say in the first one, it's interesting. When I left Deloitte 3.5 years ago, I didn't have much of a following at all because I did not think that posting my personal ideas, one, was not something we did as much back then. But also, I think as a senior leader in the firm, like I had a comms team. I had other people that wanted to help influence that message. So I wasn't encouraged necessarily to write my own post and do all of that. So one, I want to say it's definitely something that has felt important to me, but that is newer and that I'm cultivating. And I think it's really understanding that for women, especially, the reason I do it is that I don't think that we can separate the things that happen in other spheres, other spaces, the challenges we face at home around, for example, housework and, childcare duties and parental, care duties. Those things affect how we show up at work. They affect how much time we have. So they're not separate topics. I sometimes get, well, these are not work topics. Why are you talking about them here? I think they're part of the challenge and the setup for why women face obstacles and challenges in the workplace. And so one, it was understanding that, getting comfortable with that, finding my own voice in that. It's been a process. I just want to kind of state that up.
Yeah, I love that.
The other thing I would say is, as far as how things go, so the book came out in 2022. I sometimes had 6 and 7 and 8 speaking engagements and conversations per day, because it came out in the moment of we were talking about all these things. Everyone is focused on advancing women of color, especially in the workplace. 2024 has been quieter ever since, the Supreme Court rulings and the concerns about what's coming next. I think a lot of companies are hesitant. And by the way, not just to do work on race, but even to do work in the gender space. So a lot of the women's programs that I had teed up to kick off in January, February, were put on pause because there was some fear we can't do programs that are focused on women because we could get sued. I mean, just to put it simply, it's a much longer story. So I think it's a process to really understand that when we talk about cutting back things like DE&I, we're not just talking about cutting back the things that I think most people come to top of mind. It's about changing all of that. That has huge impacts on culture, and not only the people who are in the workplace now, but all the data suggests that the next crop, the next generation is choosing jobs and choosing companies based on how inclusive and what their tone and tenor is at the top. So yeah, it's this really fascinating time where I don't feel like what I'm seeing and the fear that I see matches the reality of talent in the workplace and what people want necessarily. So I think we're in a moment of, I want to call it pause. I don't think it's a swing back necessarily. I call it a pendulum. And I think the last couple of years have been moving back and forth. I think we're just in a minute of pause waiting for what comes next.
Yeah. I feel like I could infer some of this next question, but I want to give you the space to answer it. But why do you personally feel motivated to have a voice at the table?
I think it's always something I've had. I've always been who I am. I've never apologized for that. I'm the oldest of 2 daughters. My parents are, Indian. They came here in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I think there was a lot of how we grew up that was based in, my dad would often say, if I had a son, he would go cut the grass. He would do this, he would do that. I was always like, I'm going to show you, it doesn't really matter. That's not how it works. And so I think this sense of I can show you and I can write my own narrative and help others, see what is possible, whether that's on the soccer team. I was the only girl on the boys soccer team for 15 years.
I am in awe. My son plays soccer and I always look at the women. There are some girls who play against him. And
when I was coming up, there was no girls team. So it wasn't a choice if I wanted to play soccer. I didn't have a choice. So I've always had this sort of, I'm going to do what I want to do. And if you don't like it, you can figure it out. But I've also been in some ways lucky that the backlash hasn't been as harsh as it could have been in some of those, I know parents saying she can't play, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's always been something that I've done. And I think it's so important right now because I think that there are so many women and women of color struggling in corporate spaces. I think a lot of senior executives will call me and say, I share all those stories or, the story of Ronnie could be me in your book in chapter, 6. But I think there's a lot of fear about coming out and telling those stories. And so for me, a little bit of sharing my voice is I see patterns, that I see constant cycles in what's happening in the workplace that are not unique to an individual. They are the result of being women and women of color navigating spaces that were not created for us and don't always see us. And if I can put voice to that, because I tend to not only do stories, but have research, I hope I can make change. And so it's really about the belief that we can change systems if we work together to do that and that we don't have to accept what's around us. I really believe that.
Thank you. I love that. So as we head out today, any final words of advice for a woman looking to advance, can't figure out what to do next?
Yeah, I think a lot of us, absolutely. I think a lot of us feel stuck. One of the things I'm focused on in the next few months is having more conversations about how we become unstuck, because we're not stuck. And part of what we need to recognize is that we have power all the time in all ways, and we may not see it or feel it and know that it's there, but that we're powerful. And it's really a question of finding your voice and finding ways that you can stand up to the system, for yourself, for change, whatever that is, but that there is power wherever you sit. And it's a question of cultivating that and finding them.
Yeah, thank you for helping us find it too. I am so appreciative of you. How can people connect with you? Where should they go?
The best place is LinkedIn, as you said. That's where I do a lot of my idea generation and kind of, testing of ideas, to be honest with you. So yeah, Deepa Puru, Puru, if you want so the whole last name, you just search by that, it will come up. I'm the only one, but yeah, on LinkedIn would be the place.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Deepa. Thank you for spending the day with me. I appreciate that. And I wish you the best of luck. I look forward to seeing what's next for you and for women in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before you go, I have a question for you. Do you know how close you are to your next promotion? Really? Not what your boss has told you, not what you even believe to be true, but have you actually taken the time to sit down, take an assessment, review the 5 categories that it takes to get promoted into senior executive leadership positions, and decided where you fall in each category, and given yourself a ranking on a scale of 1 to 10 of how close you are to getting your next promotion? Have you done this? Well, now's your chance. If that feels interesting to you and you're like, hey, I want to know exactly how close I might actually be, or how far away you might be, and what it's going to take to get you even closer, then I invite you to take my promotability quiz. This is a quiz that I put together with practical tips that actually tell you where you're lacking and where you're winning. What are the areas that you actually need to improve, and not necessarily what your boss is telling you all the time, so that you can take concrete steps towards landing that next promotion and changing the face of the leadership table. Go to yourpromotabilityscore.com to take your free assessment today.